So we were finishing up the topic of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we said number 13 that the Cuban Missile Crisis is literally considered the peak of the Cold War. We had never come so close to destroying each other and getting close to World War III. And one more thing, number 14, Kennedy and Khrushchev created what they called the Washington to Moscow or the Moscow to Washington hotline, which was basically a phone that went directly from the president's desk to the leader of Russia's desk, the premier of Russia, to his desk. So they didn't have to wait and try to decide on what each other is thinking. They were so nervous that more tensions would follow and that more issues would happen that they created a phone line where all they had to do was pick it up and it would go right to the president's desk or the other leader's desk, and they would be able to work out their situation. But that's how nerve wracking this entire situation was growing to be. Let's move on to talk about the Berlin Wall. Now, as we've said before, a divided Berlin between East Berlin, which was the communist side, and West Berlin, I'm not really sure why there's a period after the A there, sorry, and West Berlin, non-communist, was continuing to be a problem in Berlin. What was starting to happen was the people from the West Berlin, which would be, let's maybe call it the fun side, were having a great time. It symbolized America, it symbolized democracy, it symbolized capitalism. And on the eastern side of Berlin, maybe call it the no fun side, people were really distraught. And businesses were failing, and they were lending itself more towards communistic side of things. And more people from East Berlin started to travel to West Berlin and stay over there. Now remember, keep in mind, Berlin is on the eastern side of Germany, which was the communistic side. Remember how we said that Germany is divided between West Germany and East Germany. But Berlin is on the East Germany side, even though it has a mix of West and East and West Berlin, meaning communist and non-communist side. The communists, with the Russian help, decided to build a wall in 1961 to prevent people from the eastern side of Berlin, the no fun side, to go to the western side of Berlin, the fun side. And when they did this, it kind of didn't really happen like overnight, but it happened very, very quickly. The Russians got right on it and told the Eastern Germans to start building this wall. Well, this created confusion because what was happening is that people were already, before this wall was created, people from West Berlin would travel to East Berlin and they would get their groceries, they would shop, and so on and so forth. East would go to West, West would go to East, and it was becoming a problem. And so they didn't want people to leave. They wanted people to stay in the communistic side, and other people did not want to stay there. This is a picture of how long this, what this kind of looked like here. Notice you have East Germany here, and you have East Germany here. It's all surrounding Berlin. You have East Berlin, and you have West Berlin. And this is the wall that kind of goes through. The Brandenburg Gate was a main gate that was kind of used for people to kind of come in and come out. But this wall would be hundreds of miles long, and you could see it for a really long ways. And it wasn't like like a like 2 foot wall. We're talking like probably 9, 10 feet, maybe even taller than that in some spots. And this is kind of what it would look like. This is an overhead view. Notice what you have here is you have barbed wire fence. You would have buildings here, and they have some crazy stories. I'm going to show you a video in just a minute. Some crazy stories about people escaping from West Berlin to East, or from East Berlin, the no fun side, to go to the West Berlin, the fun side. And they had some crazy stories about how people got over there. I'm going to save that for the video. But they would have guards on these towers in some of these areas shooting down people that would try to escape. This is pictures of kids on the one side of the wall. Obviously you see this is a very tall wall. Soldiers would patrol this area, but this is what it would just divided the two sides of Berlin. This is an overhead view of kind of what it looked like probably in around the 70s. Notice all painted, and people kind of, it was kind of their way to protest things, but you got soldiers and other people. If you got over here, they would have people on this side that would be able to shoot you, and you would have probably about a good 20 to 30 yard run before you could get anywhere over there. This is a picture of Kennedy. He visited this site in Western Berlin in 1963, in June of 1963. That's Kennedy right there. You see my cursor. But this is the East Berlin side. Notice you got military guys, you got the barbed wire, you got a whole bunch of politicians, and they're celebrating the something like 700th anniversary of Berlin, and so he was there, in which he said, "We are all Berliners," which is basically meaning in spirit, we are all just like you. And so Berlin becomes the Berlin Wall. Actually, I think that should be number. Oh, that is number 3. Sorry about that. And the Berlin Wall becomes the symbol of the Cold War. So we have the peak of the Cold War is the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the symbol of the Cold War is the Berlin Wall. Now, why would the Berlin Wall be the symbol of the Cold War? Well, if you remember, what did Winston Churchill say that Russia had created? Correct, Iron Curtain. And that's kind of what this symbolized. It was finally torn down, the Berlin Wall was finally torn down in 1989. But basically, post World War II till about 1989, 1990, you had 2 different Germanys, East Germany and West Germany. So if you look at like Olympics during that time, you had East Germans, you had West Germans, and that were competing. And then it was finally torn down, and they were able to unite them back together, all of Germany, in 1990. This is a picture of some of these things going down. You have the East Germans knocking down this wall. This is kind of the fun side. This is the huge celebration that they had. Military people couldn't believe this, and it kind of almost literally happened overnight. And as I show you this video, you'll kind of see how that took place. It was kind of cool. People literally taking sledgehammers to this and just destroying it. It was like a symbol of frustration. It was a symbol of communism. It was a symbol of disunity of the German people, and it was a symbol of subjugation under the communist regime. So don't write that down. I'm going to go to the video here and sit tight. And here we go.
1961 to 1989, the Cold War. The Berlin Wall would become a symbol of ideological division and suppression of human rights during the Cold War. It represented the Iron Curtain that separated Western Europe and the Eastern Bloc. In August 1961, the communist government of the German Democratic Republic of East Germany began construction of the wall and placement of barbed wire between West Berlin and the East. Its purpose was to stop Western fascists from entering the socialist state of East Germany and stopping defections from East to West. It would continue to do so until November 9, 1989, when the East German regime announced that its citizens had the right to cross the border when they wanted. The wall goes up. When World War II came to an end in 1945, the victors came together at the Yalta and Potsdam conferences to split Germany into 4 Allied occupation zones. East Germany would go to the Soviet Union, while the western part went to the United States, Great Britain, and France. Even though Berlin was located entirely within the Soviet part of the country, the city would be split into 4 sectors in the same way. The Russians were determined to remove the United States, Britain, and France from Berlin. A Soviet blockade in 1948 attempted to starve them from the city. However, the United States and its allies resisted by dropping food and fuel supplies from aircraft, which became known as the Berlin Airlift. The booming western sector, which was the showcase of capitalism, contrasted sharply to the economically poorer east. Many German refugees flowed from the east to the west, including highly skilled workers such as doctors, teachers, and engineers. Between 1945 to 1961, 15 to 20% of the East German population had left to the west. Premier Nikita Khrushchev, leader of the Soviet Union, had had enough and gave the East German government permission to close Berlin's borders for good. On the night of August 12th and 13th, 1961, East German soldiers, the police force, and volunteer construction workers laid down barbed wire and a cinder block wall which stretched over 100 miles. As the decades went on, the wall developed into a more sophisticated one, featuring a series of tall concrete walls, electrified fences, fortifications, and watchtowers. Escaping East Berlin. Now people would no longer be able to cross freely with ease to go to work or shop, as they had done before. Now, in order to get from west to east, they had to pass through border crossings. The most famous were checkpoints Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. But there were several other border crossings. Which checkpoints or border crossings could be used also depended on nationality, dependent on whether they were West Germans or foreigners or a status such as military personnel or diplomats. West Berliners or West Germans, as well as foreigners, could apply for a visa to get into East Berlin. East Berliners and East Germans, however, were not permitted to cross the border to West Berlin or West Germany. In October 1961, U.S. Chief of Mission in West Berlin, E. Allen Leitner, was stopped in his car by East German police. This prevention of access for American officials to East Berlin caused a standoff between American and Soviet tanks, which faced off at Checkpoint Charlie. For many hours, both sides stared each other down, waiting for their enemy to fire. The potential for World War III was eventually averted when President John F. Kennedy contacted Nikita Khrushchev and convinced him to withdraw his tanks. The American tanks also backed away soon after. Armed soldiers patrolled the wall and would shoot anyone on sight attempting to escape. Ditches, barbed wire, guard dogs, searchlights, and minefields were also set up to prevent escape attempts. Buildings overlooking the wall were demolished or had their windows bricked up so that people could not escape by jumping from them. At least 171 people were killed trying to cross the wall, but this didn't mean that escape was impossible. Hundreds of East Germans tried to escape across the wall, including by flying in a hot air balloon, by zip line, on a tightrope, in a car without a windshield, by swimming, and through a tunnel. President John F. Kennedy visited Berlin on June 26, 1963. He made a speech known as Ich bin ein Berliner, referring to himself as a Berliner in spirit, as a way of ensuring that the United States would fully support West Berliners and Germans. This would be a big morale boost, but while President John F. Kennedy protested, he realized a wall was better than war. On June 12, 1987, U.S. President Ronald Reagan arrived in West Berlin for its 750th anniversary celebration. In his speech at the Brandenburg Gate, he challenged Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the wall. The fall of the wall. On November 9, 1989, with the Cold War thawing and political changes happening across the Eastern Bloc, the East German government announced that all GDR citizens could visit West Germany and West Berlin. Günter Schabowski, the East German communist official who was the unofficial spokesman, had announced a new freedom of travel for East Germans to the West, in that they could apply for visas from the state agency in an orderly manner. In an unprepared interview, after not having all the information, he said to journalists, "We have decided today to implement a regulation that allows every citizen of the German Democratic Republic to leave East Germany through any of the border crossings." And when asked when this would take effect, he responded, "According to my information, immediately, without delay." From this interpretation, thousands of East Germans gathered around the checkpoints and the wall, creating a party atmosphere. Then the crowd of East Germans crossed the border and climbed onto the wall, celebrating with West Germans on the other side. People knocked down the wall with hammers, and soon with the help of bulldozers, it was pulled down. The reunification of East and West Germany was made official on October 3, 1990. Subscribe to our...
All right, so that just kind of shows you a little bit more visual on what had taken place with the Berlin Wall. And again, it was the symbol of tyranny that was taken down. It was the symbol of communism and the failed communistic policies. And a lot of people felt like they had lost a good portion of the joy of their life because of this Berlin Wall and how much it was, and how much it symbolized the fact that they were not unified with Germany. Germany was divided. And it really did a number on them trying to recover from World War II for a while. But again, you notice the celebration here. People were very, very extremely pumped about this. If you asked your parents about this, they probably would remember this situation. Specifically, your grandparents probably for sure would. Your parents, I would guess, probably would as well. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. And that's it for today.